Welcome, everybody. The Chidiac Foundation Media Institute is conducting this panel entitled Ensuring that Women Play a Greater Role in Conflict Resolution and Political Processes in Lebanon and the Region, under the project Renewing Lebanon's Political and Economic Structures, in partnership with the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. On the heels of the International Women's Day, and 22 years after the adoption of the 1325 resolution on women, peace and security agenda, we meet today with a distinguished group of strong, influential, and experienced women who have served their communities, their countries, built their careers, and set an example of dedication to many other women and men in the world. We meet to address questions on women's role in peace building and peace processes, but also to understand the barriers that still hindering women from playing their natural role, contributing to peace and security in their conflict and war-torn communities in Lebanon and the region. Allow me to say some words about this topic, some numbers that might be a good way to pave this exchange and discussion. Even though women were granted the right to vote back in 1953 in Lebanon, Lebanon was ranked 132 out of 156 countries based on the January 2021 rankings from the Global Gender Gap Index, which includes economic gap, health, education, and political participation. The same report finds that it will require 100 years to achieve fully parity at the current pace. And based on the same report, Lebanon was also ranked 112 out of 155 countries worldwide in political empowerment. Lebanon also ranked 182 out of 190 with regards to women's participation in parliament as of April 2021. Among other Arab countries, Lebanon still ranks 17 out of 21 in women's participation in parliament, while Egypt, Iraq, and Tunisia ranked 3rd, 4th, and 5th, respectively. I would like to start by introducing the speakers. I would love to start with Her Excellency Dorothy Shea, U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon. She's a career member of the Senior Foreign Affairs Service with 30 years of experience, appointed as Ambassador to the Lebanese Republic in 2020, served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt from 2014 to 2017. Also served as Deputy Principal Officer at then the U.S. Consulate General in Jerusalem. She holds a master's degree in National Security Strategy, and in 1998 awarded a Council on Foreign Relations Fellowship, and she lectured at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And you also wrote a book about South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Welcome.
Thank you.
Via Zoom, we have Dr. Loredana Teodorescu. Hello, can you hear us?
Hello, nice to see you.
Thank you for joining. She is currently the president of the Italian chapter of Women in International Security, WIIS, which is dedicated to advancing the leadership and professional development of women in the field of international relations, peace, and security. And through her work with the WIIS, Dr. Loredana founded a mentoring program for young women. In addition, she coordinates the Secretariat of the Global Alliance of Regional Women Mediator Network, an alliance that consists of 6 networks. Also, we have today Rachel Dore-Weeks. She's currently the head of UN Women in Lebanon since 2019. She served as UN Women's Deputy Regional Director for Arab States between 2018 and 2019. She also worked as UN Women's Regional Advisor for Peace, Security, and Humanitarian Action for the Arab states between 2016 and 18. Correct.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. And our host, Dr. Chidiac, a veteran.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for hosting us. A veteran journalist, editor, and news anchor since 1985. She survived a brutal assassination attempt in 2005. She's the recipient of several decorations and medals, including, to mention some, because I saw your bio is really long, and I had to translate this one. The Knight of the Order of the Legion of Honor.
La Légion d'honneur, chevalier de la Légion d'honneur.
I can't say it in French, I'm sorry. But
Par le
thank
président
you.
français Jacques Chirac à l'Élysée.
Decorated by the late French President Jacques Chirac in 2007. Also, she holds the International Women Media Foundation Courage in Journalism Award.
IWMF.
And she's a member of the High Panel for Peace and Dialogue of Cultures by the UNESCO, 2010, and jury member of UNESCO for the award of Emir Jaber Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah for empowering people with disabilities through digital technologies. Finally, Dr. Mai served as a Minister of State for the administrative reform in the government of His Excellency Mr. Saad Hariri. Thank you all for coming, and I would like to start now with Your Excellency Ambassador. Mm-hmm. Talking about Lebanon, if I would just think about some numbers that I tried to do my research. There are currently 6 women out of 128 deputies since the elections in the parliament 2018, which translates into 4.69%. The 2005 and 2018 elections witnessed the greatest number of women in the parliament, and it's translated into 6 women in the current parliament. On a municipal level, out of the 12,234 municipal councillors, we have 663 female women. And out of the 15 parliaments elected since 1963, there are only 8 women that were included. I would like to start the discussion by addressing this question. If we look at the current situation in Lebanon, economy, but also crisis after the following the other, what will the continued economic regression, in your opinion, mean for the security of women and their families?
Well, first of all, thank you for laying out all of that statistical information. And I'm disappointed that you stole my thunder, because I was also planning on citing the World Economic Forum data, because it's pretty damning. 132nd out of 156 countries on the Global Gender Gap Index, and 112th in political empowerment. But zooming out and looking at the broader picture, I think we have to recognize that everybody is suffering in Lebanon right now. We are in what the World Bank has characterized as at least one of the top 10, if not one of the top 3 major economic crises of the last 150 years worldwide. So that gives us a sense of the gravity of what ordinary Lebanese have been up against. And we know that women and girls were already at a situation of disadvantage before the economic crisis hit.
That's true.
Which of course was compounded by the global pandemic of COVID. And then, of course, we had the Beirut port explosion of August 2020. So we're very concerned about the impact of this multi-layered crisis on women and girls. And for me, and I assume for my fellow panelists, it just really strengthens me in my resolve and the team of people I work with, both here in Beirut, but so many colleagues back at our headquarters in Washington, D.C., are always looking at what we're doing, our activities, with an eye to how can we help the situation of women and girls, because we recognize that they are disadvantaged. And we're seeing manifestations, and I suspect that Rachel might have something more to say on this, but dropping out of school, early childhood marriage. These are some of the real warning signs that we have to look for when we see societies in crisis. And we are seeing those phenomena here in Lebanon. So I really look forward to our discussion today so that we can also brainstorm about how we can do more and better to help confront those challenges.
Thank you very much. If I may just take it from there and move to you, Rachel. I mean, Her Excellency just mentioned the different crises that Lebanon is going through right now. And that brings the question of how do we respond to those saying that women's rights and women's participation is not a priority right now? We have more urgent issues to deal with. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and we hear that a lot. We hear that at times of crisis, but we also hear that in times of stability. So there's this interesting contradiction where we have this, clear normative framework and clear commitments coming from the Security Council and other forums, which states that we have to prepare to support women's leadership and women's engagement in moments of crisis, also, of course, in moments of peace. And then we get to crisis, and we're being told, now is not the time to deal with these issues, we'll deal with them later. And I think, there's a few things that we need to reconcile with. One is acknowledging, as you said, Ambassador, that everybody is suffering. So when we talk about women's rights, we have to also acknowledge the suffering of everyone and say that there are critical things that need to be done now. And you've spoken to these numerous times around social protection, of course, fiscal reform. We're hoping that the IMF talks will happen, and all kinds of things to protect depositors and others that are hurting here in Lebanon. But then moving on from that, I think it's reconciling and admitting that that we got here because of a governance crisis. This isn't an accidental crisis that we landed in. And part of that governance crisis is a governance system built on exclusion. The only real place we saw inclusion was confessional inclusion. And so if we think about how we're going to rebuild Lebanon, the Lebanon we're hoping to rebuild is not the status quo. It's not the Lebanon I hope and I think from 2019. We're trying to build the foundations of a new Lebanon. And a key part of that is inclusion. And a key part of that, of course, from our perspective, is women's inclusion. And that's for a few reasons. One is that we know that states that have large women's increased representation within decision-making positions are more likely to be stable. And I think we have to challenge some sort of regressive ideas around that women are more peaceful or more honest. We're certainly not more peaceful or more honest than men. But because of the exclusionary nature of politics, the form of leadership that most women have built has been around compromise, negotiation, and listening. And so bringing all of that leadership into Lebanon's leadership landscape and the way we govern has the potential to be one of the many game changers we need for a different and new Lebanon. And secondly, we know that a multiplicity of ideas fundamentally changes the equation, changes how we look at things and how we address things. And bringing in all of these new voices to help us think through the problems we're facing today is a multiplier for thinking of a new Lebanon. So I think reminding people that we have to sow the foundations for a different Lebanon, that needs to begin now, and we need to walk the talk. And this isn't just about sort of normative actions. It really is about just good old-fashioned politics of bringing in new voices and new leadership into Lebanon's governance framework.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with you, and I like the expression of exclusionary nature of politics, which is, I think, it's not only a phenomena that has to do only with Lebanon, but most of the countries, at least in the region, which makes me now move to our guest via Zoom, Dr. Loredana. I mean, following the adoption of the 1325 resolution, which launched the Women, Peace and Security Agenda 20 years ago. In your opinion, what progress has been made and what is still needed?
So first of all, so thank you very much for having me here, sharing my thoughts and experience, and thank you to the organizers for providing this opportunity, especially to Dr. Chidiac. So if you ask me the progress and what has to be done, so first of all, we need to acknowledge, as was already highlighted, that the world has changed in the last 20 years in terms of security and challenges that need to be addressed. There are security issues which go beyond what was the women, peace and security and its origins. So first of all, this broader concept of global human security that we need to include in the agenda, and then new challenges such as the pandemic, which put an extreme pressure on governments, on civil society, and and it still has a disproportionate effect on women and girls, as we all know, because it has exacerbating all the inequalities. Then there are still old and new challenges in terms of security. If we look at the Mediterranean region, we are witnessing an escalation of conflicts with power and security vacuums. We know the situation in Lebanon, but we also have the crisis, for instance, in Afghanistan. So there is also a risk to lose all the progress that we made in the last years. So if we look at the agenda, I think that we can say that significant progress has been made in terms of framework. So we have a robust legal and normative framework, many international legal instruments, national and international policy commitments, also best practices, because, for instance, my government, the Italian one, has established in 2017 this Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, including more than 60 women from 21 countries, including Lebanon. And I think that this can be seen as a best practice because it's a way to recognize the contribution that women could bring to the stability of the Mediterranean region. But at the same time, if we go and look to the implementation level, here I think that really the resolution has yet to fulfill its potential. Because all these commitments are not reflected still in the reality. So if we look at the numbers, you said it very well, the numbers of meaningful participation of women are still very low. And I mean not only in the international peace and security, but also in politics and in all the decision-making processes and positions. So it's, I think that here it's a matter, first of all, of accountability. So we should, there's a need of an increased accountability in the implementation of the agenda. So we should ask ourselves how can national governments can be held accountable for not involving women in peacemaking. So we should still keep our attention there and push somehow the international community to do more and to implement fully the agenda in all its aspects. Then I think there's an issue of coordination, so we should probably coordinate more our efforts because I think that we really need to join our forces and our efforts and avoiding the overlaps. And I'm saying this because there are so many initiatives and so many networks all over the world, so I think that we should work more in this sense to create synergies. And when I say synergies, we should also work more with a different level, so working more with women on the ground, recognizing the work they are already doing, and working more with the political level, because in the end, the change comes also from there. So it's an overall process that we need to do, but definitely there's still a lot to be done.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mai, I mean, the sentence that really of great interest to me now about what was just said is that holding national governments accountable towards involving more women. I want you to hold to that thought because it's going to be your next question, not this one right now. What I would like to start with you, actually, based on your long experience, and especially as a designated minister, in your opinion, what are the main obstacles facing women to play a pivotal role in dialogue processes? I mean, you've been working outside the government, but you also were part of the government, so you had the chance to see both stages and backstages, so to
You
say.
want to know about the obstacles hindering the work of the government in
The
itself
woman,
or the women's role?
Women's role.
I'm lucky to have been part of a government with 4 women out of 30, but this was an innovation that came to the Lebanese political landscape.
Yeah.
So it was the first time. Then the government that was formed afterwards, we had 6 women. To end up with 1 woman, maybe they remembered at the last moment that there were no women on the table. They added the minister, who I respect very well, who was a former ambassador, Najla Asakir. But I was lucky to have 3 other colleagues with me at the table. And we made, believe me, a beautiful team to work. Okay, each of us belonged to a different political party, to a different political side. But we dealt with the political issues in a totally different way than when we were dealing with each other. That means we're supporting each other sometimes on some topics where we felt that men were not so maybe doing that much to take the good decisions. I can speak, for instance, about what I did to support Minister Violette Kheirallah, who was the Minister for Women and Youth Empowerment. She proposed I think it was the National Action Plan. About the the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. So I cannot tell you the mood that was on the table surrounding us. I remember we were in Babda that day. So some were making fun of some points in this resolution, and why do we have to approve the National Action Plan. It was in 2019. Believe me, I was the one who defended this cause till the end, because I knew maybe some were convinced but didn't dare to speak or to defend it, because maybe they will look a little bit weak on the table. Some others were not at all concerned, because in their parties there is not any women representation in their parties, not at any level. Some others were making fun, and we're giving power to women, they will be stronger than men, and so on. But at the end, we made it happen. And they were forced, they were intimidated, and they were forced to vote for it. And this is very important, because I think that if you had only 1 woman on the table, there wouldn't have been this coalition of women. We were 4. Each of one said a word, but I was really maybe defending it from the bottom of my heart, because this is a cause I believe in. But this said, the obstacles sometimes are from the different political parties who are represented on the tables. They don't think that it's a must to name a woman to represent their parties. Because in Lebanon, the formation of the government is different from the campaign they can have for parliamentary elections. It's a little bit more complicated when it comes to the parliamentary elections. But in Lebanon lately, we ended up with the political parties designing their quotas in the governments. And among this quota for each party, for example, this party, the CPL, they nominated Nada, but they had Nada Bustani, yes. They had 10 ministers on the table that they could have named 2. We were 4. They named me. I thank them. It's the first time there was a minister representing the Lebanese forces. So it was perfect. Raya, was
Hassan.
representing the future movement, and Raya was not a politician on the table for the first time. She was a minister before, but the new thing is that for the first time we had a woman taking in charge a portfolio dealing with security. And she was the interior minister.
Yeah.
It was something really new on the Lebanese scene and even in the Arab world. So I
later
heard
on
you
there was
criticizing women or the way we deal with issues in Lebanon, in politics, and giving women their rights. But in Lebanon, it's all the time controversial because I think we are the first Arab country where we had a minister of interior, where we had a minister of defense. And she was at the same time, when the minister of foreign affairs resigned,
and deputy.
she was vice prime minister and minister of foreign affairs. So I don't think this ever happened in any of the Arab world or even in European or Western countries. So you cannot say that we are all the time to be blamed. Sometimes we have our Heki. I don't know how to call it, but from
moments.
time to time. Yeah. But at the end, there are many obstacles that hinder the representation of women and in the political scene in Lebanon. And we are witnessing this nowadays with what's happening with a number of women who are presenting their to become their candidature to become to campaign for the parliament.
Yeah.
So till now we have till maybe March 15, but I read an article today while I was coming to office. In 2018, we had 111 women who were candidates for the parliamentary elections.
Yeah.
But the conditions were different. This time, as their excellencies already mentioned, we have the financial situation in Lebanon, the economic situation in Lebanon. We used to pay, because I was a candidate twice, but the elections didn't take place in 2009, if I'm not wrong, or 10 years ago maybe. But we were able to withdraw the money. Now it's 30 million Lebanese pounds, and you cannot, if you fail or if you don't want to continue, if you are not accepted on any list, the Ministry of Interior decided that you cannot retrieve this money if you decide at the last time before the election to retrieve the money. So many are wondering because they were not asked to be part of list, because also you have to take into consideration the law itself. They cannot be independent candidates. They have to be on a list. So if they don't guarantee that they will be part of a list, they cannot take the chance to pay 30 million Lebanese pounds and then not to be accepted on any list or to lose this sum.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's different type of problems or obstacles, but also to add and to conclude, you have at the same time laws, mentality, will of political parties, and you have the patriarchal mentality. This is the most important thing, because we used to say, even for municipality elections, don't you have a boy or a man in the family? Why the candidate is a woman from the family in the villages and so on? This is maybe a way of thinking that should change with time. We are working on it, but there is always in Lebanon what's important and what is the more important, as Rachel said. So most of the time, it's a question of what is more important, not the important.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you just really managed to summarize many of the points what kind of challenges women still face, and it's amazing that it goes from structural barriers into the laws themselves, the patriarchal mentality, but also now access to money, access to own wealth to be able to play this role. Your Excellency, how could Lebanese women break such barriers toward leadership and decision-making roles? What is lacking? What is missing?
Well, I agree with what I've heard from my fellow panelists, that the first step, I think, is a mentality that women should be expected to play such a role. Women's contribution in leadership and decision-making should be the norm, not the exception. So let's start with education and educate our boys and girls in schools that this is the norm, and prepare them from the ground up, maybe in school elections, for example. And then you work your way up to a municipality election, and so on and so forth. There are barriers. Some of them are technical, some of them are financial, some of them are mental, or a kind of framework mindset, biases that do exist and persist in society. So I'm looking at what we can be doing as the U.S. Embassy to develop programs, for example, that encourage the participation of women and girls in a variety of programs, building leadership skills and critical thinking skills, because that's what we prize in our political leaders. We've all got problems in our communities. We expect our elected leaders to find solutions to those problems. So we want to make sure that women, as much as men, and the boys and girls who are going to grow up to be your future leaders in this country, develop those skills.
Thank you very much. I will come back more to the question related to the programs, because it's also interesting that those are the tools that we have, and international community would be able to provide here, and which makes me now go back to our guest via Zoom, Dr. Loredana, sorry. How can the international community help overcome obstacles facing a real and effective engagement of women in peace processes, in your opinion?
Yes, so going back to your
after you heard
question,
what Her Excellency just said.
Yes, exactly, because I think that they highlighted very well some of the... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, here I am. So I think that they both highlighted very well some of the obstacles. I would start with the mindset, patriarchal mentality, culture, biases, and we know that it takes time to change them. Then another obstacle is, of course, the political will, because there is this feeling that this is not the priority. Now we have more challenging issues to face. And then everything is a little bit connected, because if we do not have enough women at all leading positions, then everything is connected. You nominate people who are already holding leading positions, or you invite people at high-level conferences, or if they are already, they are holding another high position. I think there is also this lack of visibility of the contribution of women, the contribution that they are already giving to the society. And in the end, there is this lack of understanding that if we unleash the potential of women, this is going to be beneficial for all of us. So it's not just a matter of women's issues or human rights. It's really beneficial for all the society. So if you ask me what we can do, it's first of all, of course, try to change the mindset and the perspectives on women's role in the peacemaking community, which means also pushing this kind of change, going beyond business as usual, prevent women from expressing their full potential. I think that the COVID somehow gives us the opportunity to rethink our society, to rebalance the power dynamics, to rebuild a new society which should be inclusive and resilient. It's also important, the narrative, the communication. So I think it's important to give the visibility to what women are already doing, to communicate their work, to showcase the women's essential role. And it's important to keep women globally connected, at least in virtual spaces like this one, to try to advance further the women, peace and security agenda and to remove all the barriers. And then I very much agree with this idea to build leadership skills, self-awareness, confidence in women. So I think that we need to change the narrative, because we are very often talking about women only as victims, but we should also highlight the crucial role that they can play also to face global challenges, security challenges, the contribution they can make to peace processes, to a different society that we are all aiming at. So it's about creating a different narrative, and it's about working with women, so supporting each other and encouraging each other, reinvigorating our leadership skill. In this sense, as you were mentioning before, I founded with this perspective, with this objective in mind, a mentoring program addressing young women in Italy who are willing to work in international affairs and international security. And I founded this program because I really think that, first of all, we need to create more, we need to work more on networks. So we need to support each other more, mentors and mentees in this case. And then we really need to work on ourselves. So if let's say if the environment it's not encouraging us that much, then we need to work on ourselves and be confident, gain confidence, and be there, willing to take the role we deserve.
Thank you very much. I will take your words and move to Rachel. I mean, changing the narrative, removing the barriers. Let's imagine we are in a normal world, not a perfect world. In a normal world, how do you think the context would change if more women were to be engaged in local and national level peace building here in Lebanon?
Yeah, so I mean, I think our co-panelists have spoken to it. I spoke to it a little bit in my last remarks. Again, to just sort of reinforce that this isn't about essentializing women's role, that women are kinder or softer or more nurturing, and those are the skills that we bring to dialogue and political governance and peace building. It really is about the way that, because women have been on the periphery of power for so long, that many, and not all of course, acquire different leadership skills. We have different paths to navigate those halls of power, corridors of power, and which often involve compromise, listening, being willing to engage in alliances with others. That those that broker in sort of strongman, authoritarian leadership or politics style are not attributes or characteristics that they take on. So I think one is just bringing a new leadership style to the governance system, which I've spoken to. A second is new ideas, which that's not just about women, that's also about youth and many other marginalized groups and bringing them to the table. And then I think a third, again, which is the result of gender discrimination, is the sort of perceived neutrality that sometimes women have. So because we've often been on the margins of politics, because often women are not perceived as political actors, we're perceived as belonging within the personal space, within the personal realm, there's many moments in history, including in recent Lebanese history, where we've seen women being able to walk into spaces where men have not been able to, and do things that people assume that they couldn't do. And that's often because they're met with an assumption that they don't bring with them all this political baggage. And of course, again, that's not all women. We can all name women who are overtly political and have fought hard to gain that political, the political leverage that they have. And those women walk into spaces with a clear political background and experience. But for the most part, we're often underestimated in the spaces that we walk in. And there is something to be leveraged there. That is, of course, the roots of gender discrimination. But in the short term, we need to be able to leverage that. And there are key places we can leverage that, whether it's trying to bring together different political parties, and you spoke to this, Dr. May, to find spaces where we can be talking to each other about trying to find interesting paths forward, or in any kind of other spaces, whether we can try to pull up this this new dynamic. And it is sad that in 2022, a game changer is bringing women into the mix. I mean, this should have been something that we put behind us 30 years ago and is no longer a new recipe or a new formula for how to do things. And then I just wanted to touch on the barriers or why this isn't happening. I think all of my panelists have spoken to this well. But also just to say that, as people have spoken about, we're too quick to accept, one, that women don't belong in the political sphere, and not we, but society as a whole, that we accept that women belong in the private sphere and are not innately political actors. And that, two, I think we're too quick to accept the argument that there are no qualified women. We hear that a lot, that we can't use quotas because quotas aren't merit-based, which assumes that everyone else who got into political spaces in Lebanon and across the world did so as a result of their merit, and that there are no qualified women to take these spaces. And until those women become qualified, we'll keep having to rest back on the cadre of male politicians that we have. And I think two things to that. With all due respect to the male politicians we have, it's not clear that they're doing a stellar job at this point, so it's now time to take risks on new faces, male and female. But also that we have proven that there is a huge glut, or maybe that's the wrong word, of qualified women within Lebanon and beyond, and now is the time to allow them into political spaces.
Thank you very much. I'm moving to you now, listening to these words, Dr. May. No qualified woman. I hear that women should take the risk. It's always women, they should be the ones moving things forward and so on, so that they can claim a political space. In your opinion, and based on the experience you have had, what are the instruments that you think are missing, but also critically needed to enhance and enable women's participation in this political sphere? What do they lack? Is it really qualification? Is it that men are not giving them the space? Is it the law? What is it exactly? Where do we start?
Of course, it's not a question of women qualified to hold political positions, because women in Lebanon are maybe their numbers is much bigger than men in many high positions when it comes to banking, when it comes to commerce, when it comes to doctors, health doctors, MD. So this is not an excuse, because at all levels, even at the universities, you have more girls studying than boys. So please, I prefer not to hear it at all. This is not acceptable. But maybe, as we said before, it's a question of mentality and maybe the question of laws. But when it comes to the law, the problem is not to issue new resolutions. Even when the international community is helping you to achieve maybe some steps regarding women's rights and giving them the rights to hold important political positions. But it's so easy to issue resolutions. But what about the implementation of these national action plan? What about the implementation of these resolutions? Apparently, on the surface, everybody is doing his job. Everybody is happy and satisfied. We can tell that we are supporting women's rights, but at the end, when it comes to the implementation or to claim these rights, you see that they put you aside. Sometimes in countries like Lebanon, and I think we will tackle the topic of Ukraine today. But you know that we witnessed war in Lebanon for so long. So the belligerents, those who participated in the war, mainly were men. So when you go to the negotiation table to discuss the future of the country, the rights of all the Lebanese community, you tend to forget about those who are not on the table. And unfortunately, the men for so long maybe didn't think that it's a must to have women on the table, on the negotiation table, to discuss some issues, knowing that women are much more sensitive to many topics when it comes to solve the results of the war or the post-conflict. So unfortunately, this happens in Lebanon, and this happened everywhere. I think even in Syria after the wars, you don't have enough women participating in the negotiations for finding solution to post-war in Syria or in any other countries, or even in Afghanistan. Now we have a common friend with Loredana. She was part of the quartet and on the negotiation table, but now that the Taliban are again in control of the situation in Afghanistan, all what they did and worked for went with the wind. So this is very important because you have apparently everybody is keen to have a good women representation to give them the rights, but when it comes to the implementation of what is decided, they forget about the important issues. And the important thing is that you are asking men to leave their place for women. Yeah. When we speak about the quota, for instance, who will vote for the quota in Lebanon, in this parliament?
Men.
You have 128 parliamentaries. Out of them, you have 6 women. So you think 122 will vote for a law to exclude them for the next elections? They will not do so. And every time, even in our parties, we ask, was it tackled during your discussions in the parliament when you were discussing the law? Nobody mentioned it. This is the answer I received, not only from my party, but from the other parties who pretended first that they were working to have women represented in the parliament. So it's always excluding, they will be excluded to leave the space to include women. So it's an equation that doesn't always work.
So is it more like about addressing the fear that men have, maybe?
Maybe.
Who knows? At this level.
They will be replaced by women
That's
who
also
are
true.
more qualified.
Which brings us back
men.
to the question of qualification.
Yeah, in many cases.
I fully agree with you. I would like to go back to Your Excellency, Ambassador. I have 2 questions related to each other. One is more like Lebanon, and one because you mentioned the Ukraine conflict right now. What role do you see women playing in resolving conflicts in Lebanon and the region? And when I mean not only necessarily the region, but taking a look at what's happening in the Ukraine. And are there any specific programs that can help women and girls to assume their role in safety and security that the embassy is taking care of?
Yes, thank you for those
levels.
questions. There's kind of 3 questions there, if I figured it correctly. Absolutely, women need a place at the table, whether it's political and everyday life decision-making, or whether it's matters of peace and security. Women are half of the population, approximately. So it makes no sense to any of us, I think, around this table and by Zoom, that we would not be entitled to full representation as important decisions get made about the futures for the next generation and about relations between and among states. You asked about the programs that we at the U.S. Embassy are sponsoring, and I hope you'll forgive me if I look at my cheat sheet a little bit, because there is so much that we're doing. I can't quite commit it all to memory, but I'm so proud of it and I get really enthusiastic. Let me start because I mentioned education. We have multiple scholarships that we support through USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. One is called the USAID Scholars. We do full scholarships for the study of students at the AUB and LAU. And I'm happy to report that 58% of our scholars are women. So that gets to the statistic that Dr. May was referring to, that women are achieving at the university level. Indeed, we are reaching thousands of women and girls through our programs every year. And sometimes our programs and our outreach are pilloried in the Lebanese media. And as if it's a big conspiracy, first of all, we don't hide what we do. We're proud of it. It's public information that you can find very openly on all of our websites and social media. Ahla wa sahla. We work in partnership with Lebanese civil society institutions who are part of the fabric of your society. We use English language to help open doors for women and girls. We have a program I'm very proud of called Teaching Women English and Entrepreneurship. Because once you get a little bit of the language skills, you can also build on that to develop more entrepreneurship skills. Language ability isn't a goal in itself, but as I said, it opens doors. USAID has also just recently launched the Lebanese Women Angel Fund, the first of its kind in this country, and I don't know, maybe even the region, to encourage female entrepreneurs. I'm super excited about that one. And USAID is also implementing a $1.5 million US initiative through the Women's Global Development Prosperity Program to expand women's presence in the labor force more generally. So the first cohort of 62 entrepreneurs will be completing their training this month. And this is, highly specialized training, and it's basically going to be a 3-year program. Okay. So very intensive, not just one-off kind of thing. We've got Tech Women and Tech Girls, 2 programs that work to promote STEAM, the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics line of education and work among girls and women. One thing that we inaugurated just recently that was a spin-off from a female graduate of one of our programs, totally her idea, and she's running with it with our support, is called Digital Mothers. Wow. And it's just a pilot project right now, but we've got 7 mothers, all from rural areas, who we are providing with tablets, iPads and so forth, to help them get a little bit more literate when it comes to digital connectivity. Because how are their children going to learn these technologies if the moms can't help them master them? So it's a pilot project, and I'm happy to see where that might get going. Last thing you mentioned, if I may, and that was the question referring to Ukraine. And, I talked at the very start of the interview about how in economic crisis, it's quite often the most vulnerable who suffer the most. And I think we can probably all agree that the same is true when you are looking at conflict and war. So my heart goes out to those who are most vulnerable in Ukraine, who are suffering under the, premeditated, unjustified, totally unnecessary war of choice, this massive and aggressive invasion that Russia has wrought upon the people of Ukraine. And I commend all of the people who are working around the clock to try to convince the Russians to cease this military aggression. And the United States is working with so many countries around the world to make clear that there is a cost for this to the Russians. We are trying to avoid any provocative actions. And we've seen what Vladimir Putin has done, which is highly provocative in terms of not just saber rattling. This goes way beyond that, but going on nuclear alert and really invoking the danger of international peace and security. So we know that it is the civilians, and in particular the women and girls, who are going to suffer the most, who are already suffering. And we call on those who are behind this aggression to cease it.
Thank you very much. If I may just steal one of the sentences that you used and move to Dr. Loredana.
But here, before you move to Dr. Loredana, I just want to mention something that really drew my attention when I was reading articles or looking on social media, is that Miss Ukraine is holding the arm, the weapon, to defend her country. Yeah. There are many women soldiers in the Ukraine army. I read about a woman who has 2 children. she takes care of them, and then go to fight. So maybe when we compare Lebanon, where in 75 I was there on the demarcation line, and we saw not so many, but we had women who held the weapons and arms to defend Lebanon the way they believe Lebanon should be. So it reminds me of how we started in Lebanon. And maybe the most difficult thing is that Ukraine was under occupation for so long. So instead of enjoying a beautiful future and having the right to decide for their future, how they should be organized, what political system, and so on, there are always neighbors, like what happened in Lebanon, who decide that they have the right to control the neighbor countries, or they consider that the neighbor country is smaller than theirs, and it's a province. It's not, they don't have the right to be an independent country. But here, to go back to our main topic, I salute the Ukraine women, because really they are doing a beautiful job defending their country.
Thank you very much. I mean, what Your Excellency just said was women need a place on the table, and women deserve a place on the table. And Dr. Mai said that women are carrying the weapon too. Dr. Loredana, how can women's participation and leadership, I think I just have to look at this side, how can women's participation and leadership make the difference and be of the benefit needed for peace and security, looking at a country like Lebanon, the war now in the Ukraine?
Yeah, so first of all, as was highlighted, having women at the table allows us to reflect, to embrace the diversity of our society. Otherwise, there is no agreement, no decision that will reflect our collective aspirations. And then if we look at peace talks, there is plenty of evidence that when women are meaningfully involved, peace talks are more likely to address root causes, which means are more likely to bring more sustainable results. They are more likely to be reached and to last longer. So this, of course, is very much related to the fact that involving women is not just because of women's rights, it's an issue of democracy, and it's really for the benefit of stability of our countries, of our region, because this is very much related to the inclusivity, so having an inclusive dialogue, having an inclusive decision-making progress. Then involving women means also make the most out of their competencies, their talents, bring to the table new and diverse perspectives. And we know that this is really essential if we need to come up with new ideas, new solutions, especially if we are looking at these new global challenges and the different crises all over the world. Women can then bring their own expertise and their different needs, their different priorities. Let's not forget also that women have, in many countries, also a specific access to a larger part of the population, so they can also bring this, let's say, larger perspective with them. Involving women also turns them into role models, especially in patriarchal societies. So they can be also helpful to change the narrative and the image, to overcome some biases, and they can be really helpful in strengthening the dialogue with the civil society. So in the end, it's about their competencies and it's about inclusion. In this sense, let me say that some countries are already speaking about a feminist foreign policy. Some others are just starting to acknowledge that the major challenges of our time cannot be addressed just by business as usual. I think that promoting gender equality should be, of course, a guiding principle also in our foreign policy, but that we can also be more ambitious. Which means that we really need a new paradigm, a shift of paradigm in how we do foreign policy, about how we frame cooperation, how we frame security, how we frame the humanitarian assistance, which means that these should reflect a gender-sensitive approach, but also a more diverse perspective and a rebalanced power power dynamics. So this is, I think, all very much connected. This is really a different way of doing things, and I think that this could help us probably overcoming some challenges and little by little, step by step, also changing the mindset, the culture, which we know is one of the main obstacles to the participation of women.
Thank you very much. It's amazing. While you were talking, I had the feeling that I wanted to address on a regional level, on a worldwide level, but I can understand also that everything that you just recommended also would fit in the Lebanese context on a national and even a local level, which makes me now move to Rachel. I mean, I hear including women means stability. This is what the country right now needs, the whole region. Being stuck in politics, Dr. Loredana just said women would bring new diverse perspectives to the table. What is your ask as UN woman to the government of Lebanon?
Yeah, I mean, I think our asks are two simple ones at this point. I mean, there are many, and women's rights activists have been asking them for a long time. A lot of them relate to legal reforms. A unified civil personal status law is the primary ask of women's rights activists in Lebanon, not only for issues of women's rights, but also for issues of governance in Lebanon, to better connect people to the state, and to strengthen those relationships between citizens and the state by having a unified civil personal status law. And then many other reforms. We need equality in nationality rights. We need equality under the labor law, and there's a number of things. But I think in the moment where we are 3 months before the elections, it's two main asks, and not only just to the government of Lebanon. And the first is for political parties to be appointing women on their lists. Dr. Bey, you spoke to this. We're not going to see a greater number of women in politics unless political parties make the decision to appoint women. Now is the time. They have about 2 weeks to do so. And that is something that the international community, I believe, is expecting of them, and women's rights activists, but also allies of women's rights actors and democracy advocates across the country and globally are looking at them to do so. And the second is, after the elections, appointing women into key positions. We'll start to see a raft of new appointments, both within the cabinet and beyond, and there'll be a responsibility for those in power to be appointing women.
Okay, thank you very much. I think those are like clear-cut asks and requests. And now I would like to move back to you as our host with my final question, and taking it from what just Rachel mentioned. Including women's representation in the national agenda. Does it fill the gap? Does it give the answers? Do we break barriers with that?
What do you mean by national agenda? That means to think about women whenever we take any decision.
Every time when it's about national issues in this country, that always to include women.
Yeah, but personally I believe so. But you cannot convince all the decision makers to take the step, because they will answer you, and this happened with me many times. Why do you have to force things? Whenever we have qualified women, or we feel that women can fill this position, they will be chosen automatically. So no need to think particularly about women whenever you need to think about any decision in the country, or to put them on the agenda, to keep them in mind whenever you take any decision in the country. So it's not that easy to provoke things, to force things. And sometimes it works. I'm for the quota, because you have to start somewhere. Not forever, but at least for maybe 3-4 times, so the people can be used to the idea of voting for women, so that women can get used that they can run for elections easily, without asking the authorization from the family, the parents, and so on. We are a country where, you know, you met a lot of women, and all the time it's a controversial country because you have really emancipated women, and at the same time you have oppressed women. So sometimes you don't know with what kind of women you are dealing when you discuss a new topic on the agenda of the national plan on whatever issue. So it's a delicate thing to decide that you have to include women, to have an inclusive agenda whenever you tackle any topic, to think about the women's rights when you cover it. It will be maybe things have to come in a natural way sometimes. But whenever you need to force things, like in the quota, voting for a quota, in such cases, I'm with it. But to be obsessed by the idea that whenever you have to take a decision on the any decision making, you have to think about women, it's a little bit tough.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are running out of time. So I would like to do the closing right now. I think I myself, I really have learned a lot. I've learned that sometimes words that we use, they give an indicator about the mentality, how we were raised as men in such communities. But I'm also glad that there are times are changing. Mentality is also changing. It's a process that's taking time. International support is needed, but also that UN organizations are also acknowledging that there is a problem and there's an issue, and they are trying to address it, but at the same time keeping the things related to culture also in mind. I'm also proud that Dr. May was also able to give some insights about her experience as a journalist, human rights defender, at the same time an ex-minister, female woman minister.
University professor.
And university.
Most of my students are girls.
Girls.
This is why I was giving this as an example.
This is now I would like to thank you all. Dr. Loredana from Italy was on Zoom.
Thank
Your
you.
Excellency, U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, and Rachel from UN Women, and of course our host. Thank you very much for having us. And also we would like to thank the Chidiac Foundation Media Institute and the Public Affairs section.
Exactly.
At the U.S. Embassy.
Shea is also a host.
in Beirut for organizing this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Really
Thank you.
interesting discussion.
Thank you.